Hi, I'm Jonas Torren. At my grandfather's will reading, they handed my brother a check for $4.2 million while I got a scratched-up pocket watch that hadn't worked in decades. My brother smirked. The lawyer looked sympathetic. My aunt patted my shoulder like I was a charity case. But when I opened that watch 3 days later and saw what was hidden inside, my sister-in-law's face drained of every drop of color. She knew. They all knew. And the secret my grandfather left me was about to crack their perfect little empire wide open. But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The law office smelled like old leather and furniture polish, the kind of place where every surface gleamed but nothing felt warm. I sat in one of those high-backed chairs that made you feel small, watching dust particles drift through the afternoon light streaming in from the tall windows. My brother Marcus sat across from me, legs crossed, checking his phone every 30 seconds like this whole thing was just an inconvenience wedged between his real life. His wife Claire sat beside him, perfectly postured, her cream-colored suit probably worth more than my rent. My Aunt Linda occupied the chair at the end, hands folded in her lap, wearing that expression she always had, the one that said she was tolerating my presence out of obligation. She'd been Grandpa's younger sister, the one who'd moved to Boston and made something of herself in real estate. At least that's how she told it. Grandpa used to say she'd made something of herself by stepping on anyone who got in her way, but he'd say it with a sad smile, like he wished things had been different between them. The lawyer, Mr. Westbrook, was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of voice that made everything sound like an apology. He cleared his throat for the third time and adjusted the papers in front of him. He'd already gone through the preliminaries, the legal language that basically amounted to Grandpa being of sound mind when he'd drawn this up 6 months before the stroke took him. 6 months. That was when I'd last seen him, really seen him. I'd driven up to Burlington on a Tuesday afternoon because something in his voice on the phone had sounded off. Not sick, just weighted down. When I got there, he was in his workshop behind the house, the one that still smelled like sawdust and machine oil even though he hadn't built anything in years. He'd looked up when I came in, and his whole face had shifted, like I'd brought sunlight with me. We didn't talk about anything important that day. Just sat there while he showed me his old tools, told me stories I'd heard a dozen times about building furniture for my grandmother before she passed. But when I left, he'd grabbed my arm at the door and said something that stuck with me. He said, "Jonas, the things that matter most don't usually look valuable to other people. Remember that." I hadn't understood it then. Thought maybe he was getting sentimental in his old age. Now, sitting in this sterile office, I was about to find out what he meant. Mr. Westbrook pushed his glasses up and began reading in that careful, measured tone. To my nephew Marcus Torren, I leave the sum of $4,200,000 to be distributed from my investment accounts and estate holdings. This includes the property located at 212 Mountain View Drive and all associated assets. Marcus didn't react. Not outwardly. But I saw Claire's hand move to his knee, a small squeeze. Aunt Linda nodded, like this was exactly what she'd expected, what was proper and right. My chest felt tight. Not because I'd expected anything different, but because hearing it out loud made it real. Grandpa had been wealthy, I knew that. The house in Burlington, the investments, the careful way he'd lived while building something that would last. I'd just never thought about where it would go. Or maybe I had, and I'd convinced myself it didn't matter. Mr. Westbrook continued. To my sister Linda Torren Hayes, I leave my collection of first edition books and the contents of my study, along with a sum of $300,000 for her continued comfort. Aunt Linda's mouth twitched into something approximating a smile. She dipped her head in acknowledgement, as if Grandpa were in the room to see her gratitude. Then Mr. Westbrook's eyes found mine, and something in his expression shifted. Not quite pity, but close. And to my grandson Jonas Torren, I leave my personal effects, specifically the pocket watch that belonged to my father, along with any items of sentimental value he may choose from my workshop. The watch is to be given to Jonas directly and is not to be appraised or catalogued with other estate items. Silence dropped over the room like a heavy curtain. I felt my face go hot, then cold. A watch. A broken pocket watch I'd seen 100 times sitting in the small wooden box on Grandpa's dresser. The one with the cracked crystal and the tarnished silver case. Claire let out a breath that might have been a laugh if she'd let it fully form. Marcus finally looked up from his phone, his eyebrows raised just enough to communicate his amusement. Aunt Linda reached over and patted my shoulder, her hand lingering there like she was comforting a wounded animal. "I'm sorry, Jonas," she said quietly, and I couldn't tell if she meant it or if this was just another performance. "Your grandfather clearly wanted you to have something personal." Something personal. Code for something worthless. Mr. Westbrook produced a small mahogany box from his desk drawer and slid it across to me. "The watch is here. Your grandfather left specific instructions that it be given to you immediately following the reading." I took the box. It was lighter than I expected, warm from sitting in the drawer. I didn't open it. Couldn't. Not with all of them watching. Marcus leaned back in his chair, and I saw it then, the smirk he'd been holding back. $4.2 million, and I get a family heirloom. Classic Grandpa, always the sentimentalist. He meant it as a joke, I think. Or maybe he didn't. Either way, it landed like a slap. I stood up, the chair scraping loud against the hardwood floor. "Thank you, Mr. Westbrook. I'll be going now." The lawyer blinked, surprised. "There are a few more items to discuss, some paperwork you'll need to sign regarding the workshop contents." "I can come back for that," I said, already moving toward the door. I heard Aunt Linda call my name, but I didn't stop. I walked out of that office, down the narrow hallway lined with portraits of judges and lawyers long dead, and out into the parking lot where my truck sat baking in the September heat. I sat in the driver's seat, the box resting on my lap, and I finally let myself feel it. The anger, the humiliation, the crushing weight of being reduced to an afterthought. Marcus got millions. Aunt Linda got her books and her acknowledgement. I got a broken watch and a pat on the shoulder. I didn't open the box. Not yet. Instead, I drove. Out of Portland, away from the city, toward the coast where the air smelled like salt and old docks. I drove until the anger started to drain away, replaced by something harder to name. Sadness, maybe. Or just the exhausted acceptance that I'd never been who they wanted me to be. Marcus had gone to business school, married well, built a consulting firm that had his name on frosted glass doors. He wore suits that fit perfectly and knew how to talk to people with money. He was everything Aunt Linda had wanted both of us to be, everything she'd probably told Grandpa we should aspire to. I'd become a carpenter. Worked with my hands. Lived in a small apartment in northeast Portland and drove a truck that was older than my last relationship. I made enough to pay my bills and sometimes save a little. I built things that would last, furniture that people actually used, not just admired. Grandpa had understood that. Or I thought he had. Now I wasn't so sure. I ended up at a pullout overlooking the ocean, one of those spots where tourists stop to take pictures. It was empty except for a couple of seagulls fighting over a discarded sandwich. I cut the engine and sat there, watching the waves rolling with that steady, indifferent rhythm. Finally, I opened the box. The watch lay nestled in faded blue velvet, exactly as I remembered it. The silver case was tarnished, darkened around the edges. The crystal face had a crack running from the 2 to the 7, and the hands were frozen at 417. It had been broken for as long as I'd known it existed. Grandpa used to say his father had stopped at the day Grandma died, that he couldn't bear to watch time keep moving when hers had stopped. I turned it over in my hands. It was heavier than I expected, solid in a way modern things weren't. On the back, there was an inscription worn smooth by years of handling. I had to tilt it into the light to read it. For James, who gave me every tomorrow. Love, Eleanor. James had been my great-grandfather. Eleanor, my great-grandmother. She'd died young, some illness Grandpa never talked about in detail. Just said she'd been the kind of woman who made everyone around her want to be better. I ran my thumb over the inscription, and something inside me cracked. Not broke, just cracked enough to let something through. Grandpa hadn't given me nothing. He'd given me something that mattered to him, something that carried weight beyond money. But it didn't pay bills. Didn't validate years of being the grandson who chose sawdust over stock portfolios. Didn't change the fact that in that office, in front of my family, I'd been made to feel like I was worth exactly one broken watch. I put it back in the box and set it on the passenger seat. Then I called my best friend David, the only person I could talk to without having to explain everything from the ground up. He answered on the second ring. How'd it go? I got a watch. A pause. A watch. A broken pocket watch. Marcus got $4 million. David let out a low whistle. Man, I'm sorry. That's brutal. Yeah. You okay? I don't know. I think I need a beer and about 12 hours of not thinking about my family. Come over. I'll order pizza. We can watch something terrible and you can tell me all about how your brother's a jackass. I almost smiled. I'll be there in an hour. I spent that evening on David's couch, half watching some action movie where things exploded for no reason and nobody ever seemed to get hurt. David didn't push me to talk, just let me sit there with my beer and my thoughts. His wife Emma brought out pizza around 8 and gave me a hug that lasted just long enough to make me feel like maybe I wasn't completely alone in this. Around 10, I headed home. The apartment felt emptier than usual, like it knew what had happened and was reflecting it back at me. I set the box on my kitchen counter and stared at it for a long time. Then I did what I always did when things got too heavy. I went into my workshop. It was just a converted bedroom, but I'd soundproofed it and filled it with tools, workbenches, half-finished projects. The smell of wood and varnish wrapped around me like a familiar coat. I pulled out the dresser I'd been building for a client, ran my hands over the dovetail joints I'd cut by hand. The wood was cherry, warm and rich, and the grain flowed like water. This was something real. Something I'd made with my own hands, something that would outlast me if I built it right. Grandpa had taught me that. Not directly, but through example. He'd been a furniture maker before he'd made his money in other ways, before investments and property had turned him into someone wealthy. He used to say that money was just a tool, but craftsmanship was a language. You could speak truth with your hands in ways words never could. I worked until past midnight, sanding and fitting, letting the repetitive motion calm the churning in my chest. By the time I finally went to bed, I'd almost convinced myself that the watch was enough. That it meant something, even if I couldn't quite articulate what. I slept poorly, dreaming of that office, of Claire's barely concealed laugh, of Aunt Linda's pitying hand on my shoulder. The next morning, I woke to my phone buzzing. A text from Marcus. Hey, I know yesterday was weird. Wanna grab lunch? We should talk. I stared at it for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let the silence stretch until it became permanent. But another part, the part that still remembered being kids together, building forts in Grandpa's backyard, that part won out. Sure, I typed back. When and where? How about that place on Division? The one with the good sandwiches. Noon? I'll be there. I spent the morning finishing the dresser, forcing myself to focus on the work instead of running through imaginary conversations with my brother. By 11:30, I was cleaned up and driving across town, my stomach tight with something between dread and hope. The restaurant was one of those trendy spots with exposed brick and reclaimed wood tables. Marcus was already there, sitting at a corner booth, looking relaxed in jeans and a button-down that probably cost more than my entire outfit. He waved me over. Hey, he said as I slid into the seat across from him. Thanks for coming. Yeah, well. You said we should talk. He nodded, flagged down the server, and we ordered. Then he leaned back and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Look, about yesterday. I know that was hard. Hard's one word for it. He winced. I didn't write the will, Jonas. That was all Grandpa. I know. And honestly, I'm not sure what he was thinking. I mean, I get that you guys were close, but a watch. When he had all that money? It feels off. I felt my jaw tighten. Maybe he thought I'd appreciate something with history more than a bank account. Marcus held up his hands. I'm not trying to insult you. I'm just saying it seems unfair. You're his grandson too. You should have gotten something real. The watch is real. You know what I mean. Our food arrived, giving me a moment to breathe and recalibrate. Marcus took a bite of his sandwich and chewed thoughtfully. Look, he said after a moment, I want to help. I know things have been tight for you, and I've got more than I need now. What if I set you up with a trust or something? Enough to get you stable, maybe expand your business? I set down my sandwich. I don't need your charity, Marcus. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. It's not charity. It's family. Is it? Because it feels like pity. His expression hardened. Don't be stubborn about this. I'm trying to do something decent. By making me feel like I need to be taken care of. By proving that you got the real inheritance and I got the consolation prize? That's not what this is. Then what is it? He leaned forward, his voice dropping. It's me trying to make sure my little brother doesn't spend the rest of his life scraping by because our grandfather had some sentimental notion about pocket watches and legacy. The words hung between us, sharp and cutting. I felt something shift in my chest, not anger exactly, but a kind of clarity. Marcus didn't see me. He saw a project, a problem to be solved with money. I stood up, dropped a 20 on the table for my half of the meal. Thanks for lunch, Marcus. But I'm good. Jonas, come on. I walked out before he could finish, my hands shaking slightly as I pushed through the door into the afternoon heat. I didn't look back. That night, I finally decided to really examine the watch. I sat at my workbench under the bright LED light I used for detail work, and I studied every inch of it. The case, the crystal, the frozen hands. I tried to wind it, but the stem didn't move. Completely seized. Then I noticed something I'd missed before. The case didn't sit quite flush. There was a tiny gap along the edge, barely visible. I grabbed my jeweler's loupe and looked closer. It wasn't damage. It was deliberate. The case had been designed to open. My heart started beating faster. I found the smallest flathead screwdriver in my toolbox and carefully worked it into the gap. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft click, the back of the case popped open. Inside, beneath the watchworks, was a folded piece of paper. Yellowed, thin, covered in Grandpa's handwriting. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. The paper was fragile, the creases worn from being folded and refolded. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Grandpa's careful, slanted script. Jonas, it began. If you're reading this, then you found what I left for you. Not the watch itself, though I hope you'll keep it. But what the watch has been protecting. I stopped reading, my throat tight. This wasn't just a letter. This was a message meant only for me, hidden where no one else would think to look. I kept reading. You're probably feeling betrayed right now. Hurt. Maybe even angry with me. I understand that. But I need you to trust that what I did for a reason. The money I left to Marcus isn't a reward. It's a test. And the watch I left to you isn't an insult. It's a key. A key. I looked at the watch again, at the mechanism visible now with the back removed. What was he talking about? The letter continued. In my workshop, the one you've spent so many hours in, there's a loose floorboard near the south window. Beneath it, you'll find a metal box. The combination is your grandmother's birthday. Inside that box is the truth about this family, about the money Marcus just inherited, and about why I couldn't tell you any of this while I was alive. My pulse hammered in my ears. I kept reading, faster now. What you do with that truth is up to you. You can walk away, let Marcus have his inheritance in his ignorance. Or you can open that box and see what I've been protecting you from all these years. Either way, know this, I gave you the watch because you're the only one I trust to decide what matters more. The comfortable lie or the hard truth. The letter was signed with just his initial. Gee, I sat there for a long moment, the paper trembling in my hands. Then I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. Burlington was 3 hours away. I could be there before midnight if I drove fast. The workshop sat dark and silent when I arrived, the key still where Grandpa had always kept it, under the third flower pot on the back porch. I let myself in, flipped on the lights, and the space came to life around me. Everything exactly as he'd left it. Tools hung on pegboards, half-finished projects on the benches, the smell of sawdust and linseed oil heavy in the air. I found the south window, the one that looked out over the garden my grandmother had planted 40 years ago. The floorboards were old oak, worn smooth by decades of footsteps. I knelt down and started pressing on each one, feeling forgive. The third board from the wall shifted under my hand. I pried it up carefully, and there, in the dark space beneath, was a metal lockbox. Army green, heavy, with a combination lock on the front. My grandmother's birthday. June 14, 1943. 6/14/43. I dialed it in, and the lock clicked open. Inside the box were documents. Lots of them. Spreadsheets, bank statements, legal papers, photographs. I pulled them out and spread them across the workshop floor under the bright overhead lights. It took me an hour to piece it all together, to understand what I was looking at. When I finally did, I had to sit down, my legs suddenly unsteady. The money. The $4.2 million Marcus had just inherited. It wasn't clean. It wasn't even legal. Grandpa had documented everything. 15 years of fraud orchestrated by Aunt Linda and her business partner, a man named Richard Voss. They'd been using Grandpa's accounts to launder money from real estate schemes, inflating property values, creating shell companies, moving money through a network so complex it had taken Grandpa months to untangle it. And Marcus. According to the documents, Marcus had been involved for the last 3 years. Not directly, but his consulting firm had been used to legitimize some of the transactions, to create the appearance of proper business dealings. There were emails, printed and highlighted. Conversations between Marcus and Aunt Linda about moving funds, about timing, about keeping things quiet. And in one, dated just 4 months ago, Marcus had written, "Don't worry about Grandpa. He's too old to understand what's happening. And Jonas is too busy playing with wood to notice anything." I sat there on the workshop floor, surrounded by evidence of my family's corruption, and I felt something inside me go very still and very cold. Grandpa had known. He'd known everything. And he'd left Marcus that money anyway, knowing it would all come to light eventually. Because this wasn't about the money. It was about giving Marcus enough rope to hang himself. And he'd left me the choice. The hard truth, or the comfortable lie. I gathered up all the documents, put them back in the box, and carried it out to my truck. Then I locked up the workshop and drove back to Portland through the pre-dawn darkness, my mind racing through possibilities, consequences, choices. By the time I got home, the sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. I carried the box inside, set it on my kitchen table, and sat down to think. What you do with that truth is up to you, Grandpa had written. I could take this to the authorities. The FBI, probably, given the scope of what I was looking at. I could watch my brother, my aunt, all of them go down for what they'd done. Or I could bury it. Let Marcus have his inheritance, let them all keep living their lives, none of them knowing how close they'd come to losing everything. I made coffee and watched the morning light fill my apartment, and I thought about what Grandpa had said. The things that matter most don't usually look valuable to other people. He'd given me something more precious than money. He'd given me the power to choose what kind of man I wanted to be. I picked up my phone and scrolled to a name I hadn't called in years. Special Agent Sarah Chin. We'd gone to high school together, stayed vaguely in touch. Last I'd heard, she was working financial crimes for the FBI. She answered on the third ring, her voice groggy. "This is Chen." "Sarah, it's Jonas Torren. I need to talk to you about something. Something big." A pause. "Jonas? Is everything okay?" I looked at the box sitting on my table, at the watch still on my workbench, at the choice Grandpa had left me. "No," I said quietly. "But it's about to be." 3 days later, I sat in a conference room in the FBI field office in downtown Portland, watching Sarah and 2 other agents go through the documents I'd brought them. They'd been at it for hours, cross-referencing, making calls, pulling up databases. I told them everything I knew, shown them everything Grandpa had left me. Now I just waited. Sarah finally looked up, her expression grave. "This is substantial, Jonas. We're talking about multiple felonies, conspiracy, fraud on a scale that's going to take months to fully investigate. How long before you can move on it? We'll need to verify everything first, build the case properly. But if even half of this holds up, we're looking at arrests within a few weeks. Maybe sooner." I nodded, my mouth dry. "What about my brother? Is there any chance he didn't know what he was involved in?" She gave me a sympathetic look. "Based on these emails, he knew. Maybe not the full scope, but enough that he can't claim ignorance." The weight of that settled over me. My brother was going to prison. My aunt too. And I was the one who'd set it all in motion. "I know this is hard," Sarah said gently. "But you did the right thing." Had I? I wasn't sure anymore. I'd spent the last 3 days barely sleeping, running through scenarios, wondering if there was another way. But every time I looked at those documents, at the evidence of years of lies and theft and corruption, I came back to the same conclusion. Grandpa had trusted me to make this choice. And he'd been right to. Because if I buried this, if I let them get away with it, I'd be just as complicit as they were. I left the FBI office as the sun was setting, the city lights beginning to flicker on around me. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Hey, Mom's birthday is coming up. We're doing dinner at Aunt Linda's. You coming?" I stared at the message for a long time. In a few weeks, maybe less, Marcus would know what I'd done. They all would. And whatever relationship we'd had left, however strained and complicated, would be over. I typed back, "Can't make it. Sorry." Then I drove home, walked into my workshop, and picked up where I'd left off on the dresser. Because whatever happened next, whatever consequences came from the choice I'd made, I still had this. The work. The craft. The language Grandpa had taught me to speak with my hands. The watch sat on a shelf above my workbench now, its case closed again, the letter tucked back inside. A reminder that sometimes the most valuable things don't shine. Sometimes they're broken and tarnished and easy to overlook. Sometimes they're the truth, waiting patiently for someone brave enough to find it. And as I sanded the smooth cherry wood, watching the grain emerge under my hands, I thought about Grandpa's words one more time. The things that matter most don't usually look valuable to other people. He'd been right. The watch hadn't been worth anything to Marcus or Aunt Linda or even the lawyer who'd handed it to me with that apologetic look. But to me, it had been worth everything. It had been worth the truth. The waiting was the hardest part. Sarah had warned me it would take time, that building a case like this required patience and precision. But knowing that didn't make the days any easier. I went through the motions of my normal life, filling orders, sanding wood, meeting with clients, all while carrying the weight of what I'd set in motion. Marcus called twice that first week. I let both calls go to voicemail. The first message was cheerful, asking if I wanted to grab drinks. The second had an edge to it, a slight irritation that I wasn't responding. I deleted both without calling back. David noticed something was off. We were having dinner at his place, one of those casual Thursday nights where Emma made too much food and we'd all sit around their kitchen table talking about nothing important. Except I couldn't focus. I kept checking my phone, waiting for updates from Sarah that never came. "You're somewhere else tonight," David said, passing me the salad bowl. "Everything okay?" I forced a smile. "Just tired. Big project at the shop." Emma gave me a look that said she didn't believe me, but she didn't push. That was one of the things I appreciated about them. They knew when to let things breathe. But later, as I was getting ready to leave, David walked me out to my truck. He leaned against the driver's side door, blocking my exit. "Talk to me, Jonas. What's really going on?" I looked at my best friend, this person who'd known me since we were 14, who'd been there through every difficult moment of my adult life. I wanted to tell him everything. But Sarah had been clear. The fewer people who knew, the better. At least until the investigation was further along. "I'm handling something," I said finally. "Something with my family. It's complicated." "Does it have to do with the will?" I nodded. "Yeah. But I can't talk about it yet. I will, when I can. Just trust me." He studied my face for a long moment, then stepped back from the truck. "All right. But when you're ready, I'm here. Whatever it is." "I know. Thanks." I drove home through streets slick with October rain, the city lights blurring through my windshield. When I got back to my apartment, I found an envelope taped to my door. No postage, no return address. Just my name written in unfamiliar handwriting. My stomach dropped. I looked around the hallway, but it was empty. I took the envelope inside, locked the door behind me, and stared at it under my kitchen lights. Inside was a single photograph. It showed me leaving the FBI building 3 days ago, Sarich invisible beside me through the glass doors. Someone had drawn a red circle around both of us. On the back, written in that same unfamiliar hand, "Careful what you dig up. Some graves are meant to stay closed." My hands shook as I set the photo down. They knew. Someone knew what I was doing. I called Sarah immediately. She answered on the first ring, and I could hear office noise in the background. "What's wrong?" "I just got a threat. Someone left a photo at my apartment. Me and you leaving your building." A pause. "I'm sending someone to pick it up. Don't touch it anymore. And Jonas, I need you to be very careful. If they're watching you, that means we're getting close." "Close to what?" "Close to something they're desperate to protect." 2 agents came to collect the envelope within the hour. They took my statement, asked if I'd noticed anyone following me, told me to call immediately if anything else happened. After they left, I sat in my apartment feeling exposed, vulnerable in a way I hadn't anticipated. I thought this would be simple. Turn over the evidence, let the authorities handle it, watch justice unfold from a safe distance. I hadn't considered that there might be people involved who were dangerous, who had more to lose than just money. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to every sound, every creak of the building settling, every car passing on the street below. When morning finally came, I was exhausted but wired, running on adrenaline and coffee. I went to the workshop early, needing the familiar rhythm of work to steady my nerves. But when I unlocked the door, I knew immediately that something was wrong. Tools had been moved, drawers opened, papers shuffled. Someone had been here. Nothing seemed to be missing, but the violation was complete. This was my sanctuary, the one place that felt entirely mine, and someone had invaded it. I called Sarah again. She sounded grim when I told her what I'd found. "We need to move you. Temporarily, just until we can make some arrests." "Move me where?" "Safe house. Nothing dramatic, just a hotel under a different name. Somewhere they can't find you." I looked around my workshop, at the half-finished projects, the tools my grandfather had given me, the life I'd built. "I'm not running. Jonas, these people have already threatened you twice. We don't know what they're capable of." "Then work faster," I said, surprised by the steel in my own voice. "Because I'm not hiding. If they want to scare me into backing down, they picked the wrong person." She sighed. "At least let us put someone on you. Surveillance, protection, just in case. Fine. But I'm not changing my life. We compromised. An unmarked car would park outside my apartment at night. Agents would do periodic drive-bys of the workshop. I'd check in twice a day. It felt like overkill until I remembered the photograph, the violated workspace, the message that had been crystal clear: stop digging or face consequences. A week passed. Then two. The unmarked car became a familiar presence. I got used to checking my mirrors, varying my routes, the small paranoid habits of someone being watched. And then, finally, Sarah called with news. We're ready to move. Warrants are being issued tomorrow morning. FBI and IRS jointly. Your brother, your aunt, and 4 others including Richard Voss. It's happening, Jonas. I sat down heavily on my couch. Tomorrow. After all the waiting, all the fear and second-guessing, it was actually happening. There's something else you should know, Sarah continued. We found additional evidence during our investigation. Your grandfather, he'd been cooperating with us for the last 6 months of his life. He came to us first. What? He walked into our office last March with preliminary documentation. Said he'd discovered what his sister and grandson were doing and wanted to make it right, but he was dying and knew he wouldn't live to see it through. That's why he left you everything the way he did. He was setting up the dominoes. You just had to knock them over. Tears stung my eyes. Grandpa had known he was dying. Had known about the fraud. And instead of confronting them directly, instead of tearing the family apart while he was still alive, he'd built a careful plan. He'd protected me by keeping me ignorant, then trusted me to finish what he'd started. Did he say why he chose me? I asked quietly. Sarah's voice softened. He said you were the only one who still knew how to build things instead of just taking them apart. That you'd understand what really mattered. I ended the call and sat in the silence of my apartment, thinking about the last time I'd seen Grandpa. That day in his workshop when he'd told me about things that don't look valuable to other people. He'd been saying goodbye. He'd been preparing me for this, even if I hadn't known it. The next morning, I woke before dawn. I couldn't stay in the apartment, couldn't sit still. So I drove. Out of the city, north toward Burlington, toward the house that had been Grandpa's. It was part of the estate now, technically belonging to Marcus until the legal proceedings sorted everything out. But I still had my key. I let myself in just as the sun was rising, flooding the old house with golden light. Everything looked the same. The furniture Grandpa had built, the photographs on the walls, the worn rug in the hallway that my grandmother had braided by hand. It smelled like him, like coffee and old books in the lavender sachets he kept in the closets. I walked through each room slowly, remembering. Here was where he'd taught me to play chess, sitting at the kitchen table on Sunday afternoons. Here was where I'd helped him hang new curtains after Grandma died, both of us crying but pretending we weren't. Here was his bedroom, simple and clean, the bed made with military precision. I opened his closet and found his clothes still hanging there. Flannel shirts, worn work pants, the one good suit he'd owned. I ran my hands over the fabrics, and something crinkled in the breast pocket of the suit jacket. I reached in and pulled out another envelope. My name on the front in his handwriting. I sat on his bed and opened it. The letter inside was dated 2 weeks before he died. Jonas, it began. If you found this, it means you came back to the house. I'm glad. I worried you might stay away, might let the anger or hurt keep you from this place. But you're here, which means you're still the boy I raised. The one who doesn't run from hard things. By now you know what I've asked you to do. You found the evidence, turned it over, set things in motion. And you're probably wondering if I knew how hard it would be. I did. I knew exactly what I was asking of you, and I'm sorry for that burden. But I also knew you were strong enough to carry it. Marcus isn't. He never was. I love him, God knows I do, but he's weak in the ways that matter. He chooses comfort over truth, appearance over substance. Your aunt shaped him that way, just like she tried to shape you. The difference is, you refuse to be molded. I paused, wiping my eyes. Grandpa's words were hitting deeper than I'd expected. The letter continued. The money I left Marcus was never meant as a reward. It was bait. I knew Linda and Richard had been using my accounts, but I needed proof. I needed Marcus to take the inheritance so we could track where it went, see how the network operated. Your grandfather wasn't just a furniture maker, son. I worked financial crimes for the army, back before you were born. I know how these things work. I sat back, stunned. I'd never known that about him. He'd always just been Grandpa, the quiet man who built things and told stories and made the world feel safer. Everything you're doing now, he wrote, everything that's happening, I set it up this way because I knew the law would need time to build their case. I knew you'd need time to decide who you wanted to be. Because that's what this really is, Jonas. A choice about character. You could have buried what I left you. Could have taken the comfortable path, let Marcus have his money and your aunt have her secrets. No one would have blamed you. But I knew you wouldn't. Not because you're vengeful or cruel, but because you understand something your brother never learned, that integrity isn't about what you do when people are watching. It's about what you do when the only witness is yourself. I'm proud of you, son. Prouder than I ever got to say out loud. You turned out exactly right. And whatever happens after this, whatever comes from the choices you've made, know that you did the hard, good thing. The thing that builds instead of destroys. The letter was signed with his full name, James Torren, in the careful script he'd always used for important documents. I sat there on his bed, in his room, holding his words, and I let myself cry. Not from sadness exactly, but from the overwhelming weight of being seen. Of being understood so completely by someone who was gone. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. It's done. All 6 in custody. Press conference at noon. You should probably stay off social media today. I looked at the message for a long time. It was done. The dominoes Grandpa had set up had finally fallen. I spent the rest of the morning in that house, walking through memories, touching things that had belonged to him. Around 11, I locked up and drove back to Portland. I didn't turn on the radio. Didn't want to hear the news, the analysis, the speculation. I just drove in silence, processing everything. When I got back to my apartment, there were 17 missed calls. Marcus, Aunt Linda's number, 3 from numbers I didn't recognize, probably reporters. I ignored all of them. Instead, I made coffee and sat on my balcony, watching the city move below me. Normal people doing normal things, unaware that my world had just cracked open. Around 1, David called. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Holy hell, Jonas, he said without preamble. Your family is all over the news. FBI arrests, fraud charges, your brother. What the hell happened? I told him. Everything. The watch, the letter, the evidence, the decision I'd made. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, there was a long silence. Damn, he finally said. Your grandfather was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. Yeah. How are you holding up? I don't know yet. Ask me in a month. Emma's voice came on. David must have put me on speaker. You did the right thing, Jonas. I know it doesn't feel like it, but you did. I wanted to believe her. I did believe her, mostly. But there was still a part of me that felt like I'd just detonated a bomb in the middle of my own life. The news coverage was intense. Local stations picked it up first, then regional, then it hit the national networks. Wealthy Portland family arrested in multimillion-dollar fraud scheme. The Torren name was suddenly everywhere, attached to words like conspiracy and embezzlement and criminal enterprise. I watched some of it, morbidly curious. They showed footage of Marcus being led out of his office in handcuffs, his face blank with shock. Aunt Linda being escorted from her Boston penthouse, perfectly dressed even in crisis. Richard Voss, a man I'd never met, shouting about his innocence to anyone who would listen. And then they showed my grandfather's photo, the official one from his obituary. Distinguished, silver-haired, smiling slightly. The man who'd orchestrated the downfall of his own family to protect what he believed in. The reporters called him a hero. A whistleblower. A man of principle who'd refused to let his family's crimes go unpunished. They didn't mention me at all, which was a relief. Sarah had kept my involvement quiet, listed me only as an unnamed family member who'd cooperated with the investigation. It meant I could walk down the street without being recognized, could go to the grocery store without whispered comments. But it also meant I was alone with it. The knowledge, the guilt, the strange grief of having done something necessary that still felt like betrayal. 3 days after the arrests, I got a visitor. I was in my workshop, working on a custom bookshelf for a client, when someone knocked. I opened the door to find Claire standing there, Marcus's wife. She looked different without her usual polish. No makeup, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing jeans and a sweater instead of designer clothes. Her eyes were red, and she looked like she hadn't slept. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. I hesitated, then stepped aside to let her in. She walked into the workshop, looking around at the tools and wood and half-finished projects. "Marcus told me what happened," she said, not looking at me. "About the evidence you found. About your grandfather." I didn't say anything. Just waited. She turned to face me. "He's being charged with conspiracy and fraud. The lawyers say he's looking at 8 to 12 years if he's convicted. Our assets are frozen. The house, the cars, everything. I have to move back in with my parents with our daughter." "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. She laughed, a bitter sound. "Are you? Because from where I'm standing, you destroyed our lives." I felt anger spike in my chest. "I didn't destroy anything. I just refused to help you keep pretending everything was fine. We could have worked it out. Marcus could have paid it back, made it right." "How? With money he stole in the first place? That's not making it right, Claire. That's just moving the crime around." She looked at me with something between anger and desperation. "You don't understand what you've done. That money, it wasn't just for us. We were supporting people. Marcus's firm employed 23 people who are now out of work. We donated to charities. We helped family members. With stolen money," I said flatly. "None of that counts if the foundation is rotten." She was quiet for a moment. Then, softer, "He's my husband, Jonas. The father of my daughter. And you just sent him to prison." "He sent himself," I said. I just stopped pretending I didn't see it. She stared at me, and I saw the moment she realized I wasn't going to apologize, wasn't going to take it back or express regret. Her face hardened. "I hope you can live with yourself," she said, walking toward the door. "I can," I replied. "Can you?" She left without answering, and I stood there in the silence of my workshop, my hands shaking slightly. I'd meant what I said. I could live with myself. But it didn't make the encounter any easier. The preliminary hearing was set for 3 weeks later. Sarah called to prep me, even though I wasn't expected to testify. As the person who'd provided the initial evidence, I might be called as a witness eventually, but for now, I was just supposed to sit tight. Marcus's lawyer reached out through official channels, asking if I'd be willing to meet with his client. I declined. There was nothing Marcus could say that would change anything, and I wasn't interested in being guilt or manipulated. Aunt Linda sent a letter. It arrived at my apartment in a cream envelope with her Boston return address. I almost threw it away unopened, but curiosity won out. Inside, her handwriting was as precise as ever. "Jonas, I understand you feel you've done the right thing. I even understand why you might believe your grandfather wanted this. But I need you to understand what you've actually accomplished. You've destroyed a family. Not just Marcus and me, but cousins, nieces, nephews who will now grow up with the stigma of this scandal. Children who will Google their family name and find mugshots and fraud charges. Was that really what James wanted? Was that really justice? I read it twice, then put it in the shredder. She was trying to make me responsible for consequences that were always going to come. Whether I'd found the evidence or not, whether I'd turned it over or not, the truth had a weight of its own. It would have surfaced eventually. At least this way, it happened on terms Grandpa had controlled. With documentation, with a clear trail, with a chance for actual accountability instead of just whispered suspicions and family secrets. I went back to work, threw myself into projects. Built a dining table for a young couple buying their first house, crafted a cradle for David and Emma who'd just announced they were expecting, restored an antique desk for a professor at Reed College. The work steadied me, gave me something concrete to focus on while the legal machinery ground forward. 6 weeks after the arrests, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Jonas Torren?" A woman's voice asked. "Speaking. My name is Angela Morrison. I'm a producer for a podcast called American Fraud. We're covering your family's case, and I was hoping you might be willing to talk to us." "I'm not interested in being interviewed." "I understand. But I think you should know, we've been doing deep research into your grandfather's background. There's more to his story than what's in the public record. Things that might give you some context for why he did what he did." "What kind of things?" "Can we meet?" "Just coffee, off the record if you want." "I think you'd want to hear this." I met her 3 days later at a cafe in southeast Portland, a quiet place with good coffee and booths in the back where you could talk without being overheard. Angela was in her 40s, sharp-eyed, with the kind of focused intensity journalists get when they're onto something real. She pulled out a folder as soon as we sat down. "Your grandfather, James Torren. Did you know he testified against his own commanding officer in 1978? I shook my head. "Court-martial case," she continued, sliding papers across to me. His CO had been skimming money from unit funds, selling supplies on the black market. Your grandfather discovered it during a routine audit and reported it, despite threats and pressure to stay quiet. The CO went to military prison. Your grandfather's career was basically over after that. He was reassigned to a desk job and never promoted again. I stared at the documents, Grandpa's name appearing over and over in the testimony transcripts. He had a pattern, Angela said, of doing the hard right thing even when it cost him everything. After he left the Army, he worked as a financial investigator for a private firm. Blew the whistle on 2 major cases, both times at personal cost. The second time, he was blacklisted from the industry. That's when he went back to furniture making full-time. I sat back, processing this. Grandpa hadn't just been a craftsman who happened to stumble into doing the right thing. This was who he'd always been. Someone who chose integrity over comfort, every single time. "I thought you should know," Angela said gently. "What he asked you to do, it wasn't random. He was asking you to be who he'd been his whole life. Someone who couldn't look away." I thanked her for the information and left the cafe with the folder under my arm. That night, I read through every page. Court documents, employment records, letters of commendation and termination. A whole history of my grandfather I'd never known. He'd paid for his principles, over and over. Lost promotions, lost jobs, lost opportunities. And he'd never complained, never made himself a martyr. He'd just quietly done the work he believed in, built furniture with his hands, and waited for someone in the family to inherit his spine instead of his sister's ambition. The trial began in January, cold and gray. I attended the first day, sitting in the back of the courtroom gallery. Marcus sat at the defense table in a suit that looked borrowed, his face gaunt. He'd lost weight, his hair was graying at the temples. Where our eyes met across the room, something passed between us. Not forgiveness, but maybe understanding. We'd both made choices. Mine had led here. Aunt Linda sat separately, her own legal team surrounding her. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. The confidence she'd always worn like armor had cracked. The prosecution laid out the case methodically. Years of fraud, millions moved through shell companies, properties bought and sold at inflated values, investors defrauded. And at the center of it all, my grandfather's accounts, used as a laundering mechanism because Linda had power of attorney during his final illness. They showed emails, bank transfers, documents. Some of them I recognized from the metal box. Others were new, discovered during the FBI investigation. The evidence was overwhelming. Marcus's lawyer tried to argue he'd been manipulated by Linda, that he hadn't understood the full scope. But those emails, the ones where he'd joked about me being too busy with Wood to notice, they undermined that defense completely. I left before the day's testimony ended. I couldn't watch anymore. Couldn't sit there while they dissected my family's corruption like a biology class specimen. Outside, snow had started to fall, light and soft. I walked for blocks, no destination in mind, just needing movement. My phone rang. "Sarah. How are you holding up?" Sarah asked when I answered. "I'm at the courthouse. Just needed some air. I saw you in the gallery. Listen, the prosecution wants to give you a heads up. They're planning to call you as a witness tomorrow. Character testimony about your grandfather, context for why he documented everything. Are you okay with that?" I stopped walking, snow catching on my coat. Do I have a choice? Technically yes, but it would help the case. They want the jury to understand this wasn't just about money. It was about a man trying to protect his legacy from the people who were supposed to honor it. I'll do it. The next morning, I wore the only suit I owned, the same one I'd worn to Grandpa's funeral. I sat in the witness waiting room, my palms sweating despite the cold. When they called my name, I walked into that courtroom feeling like I was walking into an examination I hadn't studied for. The prosecutor was a woman named Catherine Reeves, mid-50s, with the kind of steady presence that made you want to trust her. She smiled slightly as I was sworn in, then approached the witness stand. "Mr. Torren, can you tell the court about your relationship with your grandfather, James Torren?" I took a breath. He raised me, in a lot of ways. My parents divorced when I was young, and my mom worked 2 jobs. Grandpa was the constant. He taught me how to build things, how to think about craftsmanship and integrity. Did he ever discuss his sister, Linda Torren Hayes, with you? Sometimes. He loved her, but he was disappointed in some of her choices. He thought she'd lost sight of what mattered. And what did he believe mattered? Doing work you could be proud of. Creating things that lasted. Being honest even when it cost you something. Catherine walked me through finding the watch, discovering the letter, making the decision to come forward. Marcus's lawyer objected twice, but the judge overruled both times. The jury sat silent, watching me with expressions I couldn't read. Then Marcus's attorney stood for cross-examination. His name was Donald Pratt, expensive suit, silver hair, the kind of lawyer who made condescension look professional. "Mr. Torren, isn't it true that you were essentially cut out of your grandfather's will?" I got exactly what he wanted me to have. "A broken watch," he said, his tone making it sound absurd. "While your brother received millions. The watch wasn't broken. It was hiding something." He paced in front of the jury box. "Isn't it possible you turned over this so-called evidence out of jealousy? Resentment toward your more successful brother?" I felt my jaw tighten. "No. I turned it over because it was the right thing to do." "The right thing," he repeated. "Even though it destroyed your family? Put your brother's wife and child in financial ruin? My brother destroyed his own family when he chose to commit fraud." Pratt's eyes narrowed. "You're very certain of your righteousness, aren't you?" "I'm certain of the evidence. Everything else is just noise." He tried a few more angles, but I didn't give him anything. When I stepped down, my legs felt unsteady, but I had said what needed saying. The trial lasted another 2 weeks. I didn't attend most of it, couldn't bear to sit through the parade of witnesses and experts and financial analysts. But I followed the coverage, watched the recaps, read the articles. The verdict came on a Friday afternoon. Guilty on all counts for Aunt Linda. Guilty on conspiracy and fraud charges for Marcus, though they dropped 2 of the lesser counts. Richard Voss got the harshest judgment, facing up to 20 years. I was in my workshop when Sarah called with the news. "It's over," she said simply. I sat down on my workbench, sawdust still clinging to my hands. "What happens now?" "Sentencing in 6 weeks. Marcus is looking at 8 to 10 years, probably serve 6 with good behavior. Your aunt might get 12 to 15. And there's still the civil suits, victims trying to recover their money." I nodded even though she couldn't see me. "Thank you. For everything. You did the hard part, Jonas. You made the choice." After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my workshop for a long time. The light was fading outside, winter sunset turning everything gold and purple. I thought about Grandpa, about the life he'd lived, the choices he'd made. About how he'd known exactly what he was asking of me and trusted me to be strong enough. I thought about Marcus too, about the brother I'd grown up with, the one who'd taught me how to ride a bike and shared comic books and stayed up late talking about what we'd be when we grew up. That person was still in there somewhere, underneath the greed and the compromises. But he'd made his choices, same as I'd made mine. 3 months later, I drove up to Burlington one more time. The house had been sold as part of the asset seizure, bought by a young family who promised to take care of it. I'd been allowed to go through one last time, take anything with sentimental value. I walked through those rooms, touching walls and door frames, saying goodbye to the place that had shaped me. In Grandpa's workshop, I took his favorite chisel, the one he'd used to teach me proper technique. In the living room, I took a photograph of him and Grandma on their wedding day, both of them young and hopeful. And in his bedroom, I took the letter he'd left in his suit pocket, the one that had given me permission to be who I was. I locked the door for the last time and handed the key to the new owners, a couple in their 30s with 2 small kids who ran around the yard chasing each other. The house would be filled with life again, with laughter and noise and new memories. That felt right. On the drive back to Portland, I stopped at Overlook where Grandpa used to take me when I was young. We'd sit on the stone wall and look out at the valley below, and he'd tell me stories about his life, about the choices he'd made and why. I sat on that same wall now, the pocket watch in my hand. I'd had it repaired, the mechanism cleaned and oiled, the cracked crystal replaced. It ticked steadily, keeping perfect time, the hands moving forward like they were supposed to. I thought about everything that had happened since that day in the lawyer's office. The investigation, the trial, the family that had been torn apart by truth. It had been the hardest thing I'd ever done, and there were still days when I wondered if I could have found another way. But then I'd remember Grandpa's words, about integrity being what you do when the only witness is yourself. I'd been that witness. I'd made the choice he knew I would make, the one he'd spent my whole life preparing me for. My phone buzzed. A text from David. "Emma had the baby last night. Healthy boy, 8 pounds. Named him James." I smiled, tears blurring my vision. They'd asked me weeks ago if they could use Grandpa's name, and I'd been honored. Now there would be another James in the world, another chance to teach someone about building things that lasted, about choosing truth over comfort. I texted back congratulations and stood up from the wall. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. I wound the watch, feeling the mechanism catch and turn, and slipped it back into my pocket. Grandpa had given me more than an inheritance. He'd given me a choice about who I wanted to be. And standing there on that overlook, watching the light fade into dusk, I knew I'd chosen right. The watch ticked against my chest as I walked back to my truck, steady and sure, marking time the way it was meant to. Moving forward, always forward, carrying the weight of what had been and the promise of what could still be built. I drove home through the gathering dark, and for the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.